Hello everyone, in today's video I want to show you how to use the basic setup that is inside Lightroom. And as you guys probably already seen in the develop mode in Lightroom, you get all these different setups and you get the basic, the tone curve, the HSL color, split zoning, and some of you are already familiar with those basic settings. But for those of you that are just starting out editing pictures inside Lightroom, I want to give you an overview on what these different sliders are doing and how you can use them properly to give the best look for your image. So the first thing that I'm doing every time when I'm editing a picture inside Lightroom is to check my white balance, which you can see here in this first section. White balance can be adjusted using the temperature slider here and the tint. In the white balance section, you can adjust the profile of the image in case you didn't do it in camera. And the white balance can be edited inside Lightroom with either presets that can be found here, and you can either use the auto white balance and Lightroom will automatically detect what's the best temperature for your picture, which I highly recommend that you do not use just because it doesn't give you that much control over your pictures. Or you can do it custom. Also, you can download presets from internet that you can apply, and I'll show you how in a different video. So let's start off with the temperature. The temperature is just adjusting how cool or how warm your picture should be, and depending on the situations you can obviously play around with this, but I highly recommend that you just do not over exaggerate with this because it will just give your picture a very weird look. For this picture I will just settle down for a little bit colder look just because it matches the blue tone of the car and of the image. Over here you have the tint, and this is just adjusting how green or how pink your image should look like, and this is a great option if you want to add a little bit of color. Personally, like my pictures to be slightly moved towards this purple zone, but you can obviously find your style later on. Over here you have the exposure settings and the contrast, and you can use exposure to increase the brightness or to decrease it in your image. This is just in case you did not get this one right from the get-go in camera, and sometimes it happens. Exposure is something that I always check before I continue my edit, but obviously you can go back to exposure when you're nearly done editing your image, just because by playing around with other options it can increase or decrease your exposure, and it's always good to do it once in the beginning and once you are done with the edit. In this example right here, the exposure was pretty good from the camera, and I want to give this picture a more moody look, and I want to bring my exposure down just a little bit. The contrast slider gives your image a more stronger look, and it increases the contrast of colors in your image. This can be set up in multiple ways in Lightroom, but for now we will just increase it just a little bit more because we will increase the contrast of the colors later on in this edit. The next slider in Lightroom is the highlights, and this just detects the brightest part of your image and recovers details from there. So the brightest point of my image, as you can probably see, is right here in the sky. And if I bring my highlights all the way down, you can see that this detail starts to come back and we can see more of those details. It's not gonna be just pure white anymore. Alternatively, you can use this icon right here to check what are the brightest points of your image to see if your image is overexposed or underexposed. And as you can probably see right now, if I bring my highlights all the way up, you can see that I start to lose a lot of details and I start to lose a lot of information in this red side of the image. Now I'll try to bring the highlights to a point where I can get as much information of the picture as possible. The next option that you can edit is the shadows slider, and the shadows are essentially the opposite of highlights. They detect the darkest point of your image and you can either increase it or decrease it. As we did before, we can select this slider right here and we can see what are the darkest point of our images and where do we lose information. And as you can see, if I bring the shadows all the way down, I start to lose a lot of details in this area. And if I uncheck this, you can probably see here that I have pure black. This is okay, but this just depends on the type of picture that you want to edit. So for example, if you really want to focus on one specific thing in your image, you can definitely increase the blacks and the whites, so you just lose a lot of information, so that is not distracting and is not taking the viewer's focus from the subject. The next effects that you can apply to your image are the whites, and these are similar to the highlights. The only difference between them is that it affects all the white spots in the image. As with the highlights, they only affect the brightest points in your image and in the parts where you have pure white. This white slider here is affecting all the whites across the board. Moving on to the blacks are similar to the whites and it's the same story. It applies to all the blacks across the image, and you can increase them here or you can decrease them. In case you are not sure how black your image should be, you can select this one right here and you can see how black your image is and you can adjust it accordingly. So we're just gonna go like this. And as you can see, even if I increase the blacks all the way up, I still lose a little bit of information here, which is okay. You don't need to worry about this. I want as much information in this picture as possible, just because the subject, which is the car, is taking up most of the space. And even if I go overboard with my edits on the car, I still just have a little bit of background here, which will not be distracting because the subject is taking up about 80% of the image. Moving on to the next set of sliders, we have the texture and the clarity, and these two play with the texture of your image. Bringing it down will make your image softer, creamier, almost like a painting level if you exaggerate with it. And on the other side, if you bring it up, it will give your image a more stronger look and all the details will just pop up. Bringing the texture down will help if you want to make your subject's skin look softer and more creamy and more blend in. And I highly recommend that you do not over exaggerate, otherwise it will just not look natural and it will look like it was over processed. On the flip side, if you bring the texture up, it will work great when you want to highlight details on your subject's skin. So if you're shooting someone that's really old and has wrinkly skin and you want to express that in your image, by bringing your texture and your clarity up, you will make sure that you highlight those details in the skin. Once again, do not over exaggerate by bringing it up too much, otherwise we will give it a fake look, and obviously we don't want that with our pictures. But if you do want that, that's okay, you can use it, but I just want you to keep in mind that it will make your image look over processed. Right now I will just double click on those to bring them back to 0, and I want to move on to dehaze, which is pretty self-explanatory, is just working with dehazing your image. I personally don't like dehaze that much just because I like to take care of the color individually, but you can use it just as a beginner photographer if you do not want to overcomplicate yourself. Dehazing essentially is bringing up some of the colors in your image and as you can see it makes them look more tropical. The next set of sliders that you will find in your basic settings are the vibrance and the saturation, and those two deal with the contrast of your colors. They work great in low light conditions, and in case your raw picture has a bland look and you want to bring up their colors, saturation and vibrance tab should be the option to consider. So for example, let's take this picture and let's say that I want my colors to pop a little bit more. I will just go over to the vibrance, and as you can see, my colors are just popping. So the blues got bluer, the greens got greener. Now, once again, Lightroom and editing in general shouldn't be about exaggerating. If you are exaggerating and are going overboard with your settings, the picture is just gonna look too processed and it will not look good at all. So for example, in this case, what I will do is I'll just bring my vibrance a little bit up and the saturation as well. And as you can see right now, the blues just got bluer and everything just pops. Everything has just more life to it. Now, in this type of picture, these two options will not work as great, but for example, if you are shooting like a land or a place that has multiple colors and you want to make sure that that thing pops, obviously vibrance and saturations are two good options to consider. And that was it, guys. Those are the basic settings of Lightroom that you can play around with. Just play around with those options, and sooner or later you will find yourself knowing exactly what your pictures need, and you will know exactly how to treat them. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.